Check out FlipsideGaming.com for all your gaming needs. Use the promo code HEROES to save 10% on all orders over $10. Hey there, this is John from Heroes and Legends, and it's that time of the week again where we go back and look at the results from the big tournaments. And now this weekend, we have the Star City Games Indianapolis events. There was a Modern Open as well as a Modern Classic and a Standard Classic. We're going to look at the top 8s for all of those and look at some of the deck lists that featured cards from Throne of Eldraine. Now, before we get into it, just a quick reminder, if you go over to FlipsideGaming.com, you can pick up singles from Throne of Eldraine or sealed product or a lot of other things. And if you use that Heroes promo code, you can save a little cash too, like you saw at the beginning of the video. That's always appreciated because that also helps the channel. But with that out of the way, let's get into it. We're going to begin, as we always do, with Standard. Here's your top 8 for the Star City Games Classic in Indianapolis. Coming in first place, as well as fourth place, Bant Golos. Second place was Gruul Aggro. Third place, Golos Fires. Fifth place and sixth place was Sultai Golos. Seventh place, Golgari Adventures. And eighth place was Jeskai Fires. So a lot of what we saw the previous weekend, obviously these Golos decks are still very powerful. There's 4 of them here in the top 8. One of them, of course, won the tournament, being the Bant Golos deck on top there. We'll be looking at that deck list in just a second. Now, the big question mark came about last week when Wizards said that they were going to move up their banned and restricted list announcement to Monday. The speculation being probably something from these Golos decks is going to get banned. Maybe Golos, maybe Field of the Dead. I think Wizards was waiting for this weekend to unfold to just get more data before they made a final decision, but there's a good chance we could see that on Monday, which means that in the future, the standard meta could shift pretty dramatically again. One other thing to point out, though, in this top 8, Gruul Aggro did pretty good, coming in second place. So this week, aggro decks did perform at least a little bit better compared to week 1. So for aggro fans out there, you're probably happy to see that. Okay, let's look at some of these deck lists. Here's your first place Bant Golos deck, very similar to what we saw last weekend. We're going to zero in on the cards from Throne of Eldraine in just a second, but of course, key cards here outside of that set, Field of the Dead, 4 copies of that. You're going to get 4 Growth Spirals, 4 Hydroid Krasis, another real key card here. 4 Boreal Grazer. Let's go ahead and take a look at those new cards, though. Quite a few of them. Oko Thief of Crowns is here. Kenrith the Return King, the buy box promo. You can also get that, however, in collector boosters. Realm Cloaked Giant, fantastic card. Beanstalk Giant, Once Upon a Time. You're going to see a lot of that today. And also Fabled Passage, another card you're going to see a lot of, at least in Standard. In the sideboard, you did have one more copy of Kenrith the Return King. And other versions of this deck were running Castle Vantress in the main. This one wasn't. And some other copies of the deck are running these in the sideboard. Sometimes they'll have additional copies of Realm Cloaked Giant, but they'll also add in Mystical Dispute and Glass Casket. Okay, second place was Gruul Aggro, like I mentioned. And a lot of pieces from this deck are very similar to the Gruul Aggro deck from the previous season. 4 Gruul Spellbreaker, 4 Pelt Collector, 4 copies of Zertok Goblin. But there are cards from Throne of Eldraine that have pushed this build. Quite a few of them again. Bone Crusher Giant is here. Questing Beast, huge card. Once Upon a Time again. Embercleave is here. 3 copies in the main. Castle Embereth and Fabled Passage. Third place was Golos Fires. So we saw this deck quite a bit last weekend as well. This is running 4 copies of Golos Tireless Pilgrim. It is also running 4 copies of Field of the Dead, but what it's doing different from the Bant list we saw a few moments ago is it's running Fires of Invention, 4 copies of those in the main, which we'll look at that card in just a second. Other than that, though, it's going to feel relatively similar to the Bant list we saw a little bit ago, but there are some differences, obviously. 5 cards from Throne of Eldraine here. Kenrith the Return King, Fae of Wishes, Beanstalk Giant, there's Fires of Invention, and Fabled Passage. Here's the 5th place Sultai Golos deck, and yes, another spin on what we have been seeing with these Golos builds. 4 copies of Golos, Tireless Pilgrim, 4 copies of Field of the Dead. One of the big differences in this version of the deck, though, are the 2 Yarok the Desecrated in the main. That allows you to exploit the Field of the Dead triggers even more so in this particular build. A lot of pieces, though, are very similar, obviously. From Throne of Eldraine, though, in the main, you get Oko Thief of Crowns, Once Upon a Time again, and Fabled Passage again. Some versions of this deck also run Castle Locthwain in the main. 7th place, Golgari Adventures. Now, these decks did well last week too, and I do think they'll continue to do well as the meta goes on. They are very Throne of Eldraine centric, though, as you'll see in just a moment as we look at the cards from that set specifically. But there's a few other important cards here. A copy of Massacre Girl, 3 copies of Assassin's Trophy. That's seeing more and more play now. And a couple Legion's End in there too. Let's go ahead and look at those Throne cards, though. Here they are. Okay, Foulmire Knight, Murderous Rider, Order of Midnight, Rankle Master of Pranks, Edgewater Innkeeper, Lovestruck Beast, Questing Beast, Once Upon a Time, and Fabled Passage. Other copies of this deck have run the Great Henge in the main as well, and some of them also run Epic Downfall in the sideboard. Okay, 8th place, Jeskai Fire. So this is a little different than the Fires deck we saw a few moments ago. This one isn't trying to do the Field of the Dead Golos thing, but still can be very powerful using Fires of Invention to not only power out spells, but also put out a bunch of Planeswalkers. So in addition to those 2 spells you can cast each turn, you get to use those Planeswalker activations as well. Kenrith is great in this deck too, because you will have extra mana since a lot of times you won't be casting your spells with it. This is a great sink for that mana, so you're still using it. Alright, let's look at the cards from Throne of Eldraine that are here. You're going to find Kenrith the Return King, like we mentioned, Fae of Wishes, Fires of Invention, of course, Castle Vantress, and Fabled Passage. The sideboard here includes Garruk Cursed Huntsman and True Love's Kiss. Remember, these decks do run cards outside of Jeskai colors many times out of the sideboard because of the ability to play them with Fires of Invention. Okay, we'll go beyond the top 8 with the 10th place Jund Adventures deck. So this is a slightly different take on the Adventure deck we just saw. Not too different ultimately, so I won't spend too much time on it. The key strategy here is to play Edgewall Innkeeper, for example, and then just try to play as many of these adventure creatures as you can and just get tons of value. 11 cards in the main here from Throne of Eldraine. Here's the first 10. Foulmire Knight, Murderous Rider, Order of Midnight, Bonecrusher Giant, Beanstalk Giant, Edgewall Innkeeper, Lovestruck Beast, Questing Beast, Once Upon a Time, Lucky Clover, and of course, Fabled Passage. The sideboard includes Rankle, Master of Pranks, and another copy of Questing Beast. Temur Midrange came in 12th place. A lot of people are actually calling this Temur Super Friends. As you can see, there's a lot of Planeswalkers. 2 copies of Domri, Anarch of Bolas, 3 copies of Sorkon the Masterless, and a couple from the new set. So let's take a look at those cards from Throne of Eldraine that are here. Quite a few again. Oko Thief of Crowns, the Royal Scions, Gilded Goose, Questing Beast, Wicked Wolf, and Once Upon a Time. Now this deck wasn't doing it, but some sideboards do run Bonecrusher Giant. 14th place Mono Red Aggro, again doing a little bit better this weekend compared to the first weekend. And there's still a lot of familiar cards here. 4 Runaway Steamkin, 2 copies of Experimental Frenzy in the main, 1 in the sideboard here in this build. You still got your Jacques, Light Up the Stage, Skewer the Critics. So what do we actually get here from Throne of Eldraine? A lot of cards again. Bonecrusher Giant, Fervent Champion, Rimrock Knight, Torbrand Thane of Red Fell, Slaying Fire, and Castle Embereth. Out of the sideboard, 2 more copies of Torbrand Thane of Red Fell, Redcap Melee is here, and Scorching Dragonfire. 15th place was Simic Flash. This is a deck that did very well last season, and for the most part, it's a very similar deck to last season. There are a couple new cards here, but you're going to see a lot of familiar ones. 4 Brineborn Cutthroat, 3 Frilled Mystic, 4 Nightpack Ambusher, 4 Spectral Sailor. Let's look at those Throne of Eldraine cards. Brazen Borrower, Wildborn Preserver, Once Upon a Time, Castle Vantress, and Fabled Passage. Out of the sideboard, another copy of Brazen Borrower. Okay, on to Modern with the big event of the weekend, the Star City Games Modern Open. And as you can see here, there's a fair amount of diversity in the top 8. There was actually a fair amount of diversity throughout the entire tournament. A lot of folks thought, myself included, we would see more of the Urza Outcome / Paradoxical Urza decks this weekend doing well. There were a lot in the tournament, but as you can see here, they did not dominate the top 8. There is a variation on that deck here, though, in 6th place, Urza Ascendancy, which we will look at in a few moments. But for the most part, a lot of different decks got an opportunity here. Let's look at the top 8. First place, Gift Storm, which actually makes sense if you think you're going to go up against a lot of Urza builds, and not just Paradoxical Urza, but also the Urza Thopter decks, then yeah, I think Storm would be a good choice. Second and third place was Amulet Titan, always a very powerful deck. 4th place was Burn. 5th place, Jund Death Shadow. 6th place was the Urza Ascendancy deck. 7th place, Selesnya Eldrazi. 8th place was Dredge. Now we're going to go ahead and look at the deck list that did have cards from Throne of Eldraine. That 4th place Burn deck didn't, but we're going to look at a different Burn deck a little bit later. And we won't look at both of the Amulet Titan decks, but we're actually going to look at 6 of these decks. Okay, Gift Storm came in first place, so take a look at the deck list. Sure, it's Gift Storm. However, there is a card here from Throne of Eldraine. It is Mystical Dispute in the sideboard. Very powerful sideboard card showing up in a lot of places. Second place, Amulet Titan, and here you go. Again, it looks like a pretty familiar deck, right? 4 copies of Primeval Titan, 4 copies of Amulet of Vigor, 4 Summoners packs are in there, Ancient Stirrings, of course, but we got some new cards too. Once Upon a Time and also Castle Garenbrig made it to the main deck here. This deck wasn't doing it, but some sideboards are running Oko Thief of Crowns too. Here's your 5th place Jund Death Shadow deck, and yet again a card from Throne of Eldraine that we've been talking a lot about today. 4 Death Shadows, of course. You got 4 copies of Street Wraith, 4 Tarmogoyf in this build, 1 Liliana of the Veil, and then a lot of cards that give you value like Mishra's Bauble, 4 copies of that. You got 3 Fatal Push, a Dismember in there, 1 Assassin's Trophy as well, all in the main. Let's go ahead and look, though, at the card from Throne of Eldraine. Yup, here it is again, Once Upon a Time. Here's your 6th place Urza Ascendancy deck. We're going to look at one of the paradoxical Urza decks a little bit later, but this is very similar. 4 copies of Emery Lurker of the Loch, which of course we'll see in just a second. A copy of Sai, 4 Urza Lord High Artificer, 2 Saheeli Sublime Artificer. And notice this particular copy was running 3 Mox Amber and 4 Mox Opal. That is starting to feel normal for this type of deck now. We'll have to kind of see if that changes any as the weeks go on. And of course, the card that separates this from Paradoxical Urza, 4 copies of Jeskai Ascendancy. Okay, we mentioned Emery Lurker of the Loch, but Witching Well is also in the main. Out of the sideboard, Oko Thief of Crowns and Mystical Dispute. On to the 7th place Selesnya Eldrazi deck. This is running a Stoneforge package with 4 copies of Stoneforge Mystic. You get a copy of Batterskull and a copy of Sword of Feast and Famine in the main as well here. 4 copies of Ancient Stirrings, whole bunch of Eldrazi. Noble Hierarch shows up too, Knight of Autumn. But, yet again, Once Upon a Time in the main. Dredge came in 8th place. Now, this time, it's not Once Upon a Time, as you could imagine, but there is a card here from Throne of Eldraine that is starting to show up more and more in these Dredge builds. That is Merchant of the Veil. 3 copies in this main. Okay, let's move beyond the top 8 with another deck running a card from Throne of Eldraine. You're going to see there's quite a few here. But this is Devoted Devastation, came in 9th place, and yes, again, you have Once Upon a Time in the main. Mono Green Tron came in 11th place. Always a very powerful deck. Pretty sure at any given time you're going to find one of these towards the top of the standings, and here you go. Of course, it does have a new card. Once Upon a Time is here too. 12th place was Azorius Stoneblade. Basically, it's an Azorius control build running a Stoneblade package. 4 copies of Stoneforge Mystic, a copy of Batterskull, a copy of Sword of Feast and Famine. Then beyond that, you have Snapcaster Mage Spell, Queller, Jace the Mind Sculptor, Teferi Time Raveler, all here. No big Teferi, though, in this particular build, notice. But what you do have is Mystic Sanctuary in the main. And in the sideboard, Mystical Dispute. 14th place, we have Humans, and we saw this last week, too. The Humans deck picking up a new card from Throne of Eldraine. No, it's not Once Upon a Time, but it is Charming Prince. 3 copies in the main. 15th place, Grixis Death Shadow. I feel like we could go all day here with decks that are being influenced by Throne of Eldraine. Here's yet another one. And this time, you're going to find a copy of the Royal Scions in the main. Now, other versions of this deck are actually running Drown in the Loch in the main, and some of them are putting the Royal Scions in the sideboard. 16th place, Esper Gorios. This is a pretty cool build, actually. 2 copies of Teferi Time Raveler, 4 Obzedat Ghost Council here, 1 Tasigur, 4 copies of Jace Vryn's Prodigy, a Geist of St. Traft, a Snapcaster Mage, 4 Gorios Vengeance, of course, some control elements here, a couple copies of Lingering Souls too. Let's go ahead, though, and take a look at what's here from Throne of Eldraine. 1 copy of Mystical Dispute in the sideboard. 19th place was good old Jund, always performing well in these tournaments. 4 copies of Bloodbraid Elf in this particular version, 2 copies of Goblin Rabblemaster here in the main, 4 Tarmogoyfs, 4 Liliana of the Veil, 4 Renin 6. No copies of Dark Confidant in this build. However, there is a card from Throne of Eldraine in the main. 2 copies of Bone Crusher Giant. 21st place was 4-color Urza or Urza Thopter Sword. And this has been pretty solidified for the last few weeks now. 4 copies of Urza, 3 Goblin Engineer, 4 Mishra's Bauble are here. You get 4 Thopter Foundries, 2 Sword of the Meek for the combo, 3 copies of War of Invention, 4 Mox Opal. No Emerys in this build, but you do have Oko Thief of Crowns in the sideboard. 23rd place was Goryo's Vengeance. This is the Goryo's Vengeance deck that actually runs 4 copies of Ilharg the Razeboar, as you can see here. Also 4 Griselbrand, 4 Emrakul the Eon's Torn. It's got some heavy hitters in here. However, it also has a card from Throne of Eldraine. That is Merchant of the Veil, 4 copies in the main. Urza Outcome. Okay, here it is, finally. 24th place. 3 copies of Emery Lurker of the Loch, which we'll see in a moment. 2 Sai, 4 Urza, 2 Saheeli Sublime Artificer. You're going to have your Paradoxical Outcomes, 4 in the main. 2 copies of Mox Amber, 4 copies of Mox Opal in this build. And here's your cards from Throne of Eldraine. Other than Emery, Lurker of the Loch, which we mentioned, you also get Witching Well and Mystic Sanctuary in the main. In the sideboard, Oko Thief of Crowns and Mystical Dispute. Okay, on to the Star City Games Modern Classic. This was a smaller event, but as you can see, the outcome was a little different. First place was Azorius Control. Second place, Amulet Titan. Third place, fourth place, sixth place, Urza Outcome. Dredge came in 5th place and 8th place. And finally, Jund came in 7th place. So obviously, Urza Outcome did a lot better here compared to the Modern Open that we just looked at. Looked pretty dominant, actually, in the smaller field. Now, we've looked at a lot of decks already, so there's not a whole ton of decks I want to show you from this tournament, but there are a few. The first one is that first place Azorius Control deck, so very similar, of course, to the Azorius Stoneblade deck we saw a little bit ago, but not running the Stoneforge package. One thing to point out here, though, too, there is a missing card in the sideboard that Star City Games probably just didn't transfer over correctly, so not sure exactly which one that is, but just wanted to make you aware. 3 copies of Snapcaster Mage, 3 copies of Jace the Mind Sculptor, 2 big Teferi and 2 little Teferi, which is pretty common in the true Azorius Control builds, and of course a lot of control spells. 4 copies of Mystic Sanctuary, though, in the main here. We'll go past the top 8 with an 11th place deck, Is It Kiki? This is a deck that's kicking around. It can put up some good results. You never want to underestimate something like this. It's not necessarily on people's radar, but I think it's a good deck. You get 4 Pestermite, 2 Kiki Jiki. You kind of see what the plan is here, right? 4 Snapcaster Mage, 4 Brineborn Cutthroat. There is a card here, though, from Throne of Eldraine in the main. 2 copies of Brazen Borrower. Here's the 12th place burn deck. Now, there was a burn deck that was in the top 8 of the Star City Games Modern Open. We didn't look at that deck list, though, because it wasn't running a card from Throne of Eldraine. This one is running 2 copies of a card in the sideboard, so I just figured I'd show you this one. Actually, their deck lists were pretty similar otherwise. So when you look at this burn deck list, it's not too different from what we're used to. 4 Goblin Guide, 4 Swift Spear, Boros Charms are here, Lightning Bolts, Lightning Helix, so on and so forth. But in the sideboard, you get 2 copies of Hushbringer. Okay, that wraps up our look at this week's tournaments. Thanks for joining me on this journey through all these deck lists. But until next time, hey, thanks for watching. Please remember to like and subscribe, and have a great day. Hey, thanks for watching. This video is made possible through the generous support of viewers like you on Patreon. Check out the description below for links to our Patreon page, as well as our Amazon affiliate store, where a small percentage of all sales will also help support the channel. Finally, if you haven't had a chance yet to subscribe, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of the new videos on Heroes and Legends. Talk to you again soon, and have a great day.